Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Let's talk Heroes Quests of Sorcado. Now, this game is launching on Kickstarter on May 25. They sent me a copy of the prototype that goes through part of a first scenario where you can get a good feeling of what the general mechanisms are, as well as how it plays, and sort of what your experience is going to be like. If you're not familiar with Quests, Heroes of Sorcado, it's a 1 to 6 player fantasy adventure-esque game in the scope of the scenario-driven campaign-style games that are out there, a la Gloomhaven and that sort of thing. Only the twist being on it is that it's easier to get to the table, the overhead is much lower, it is more accessible across the board in terms of being able to play, and being able to play with anyone, even those not familiar. The design is done in a straightforward manner in order to streamline it and to make it more accessible for those reasons. They are offering a potential 60-plus page story campaign book, along with additional up to or even more 140 pages on the campaign itself, as you go through a series of scenarios, quests, traps, story elements, so that your characters can defeat the final demon lord who is ravaging the world. It is cooperative, it is dice-driven, with card and hand management elements, and it features a unique mechanism to involve more than one character or person, depending on the player count, at a time throughout the gameplay. Let's take a look at what it actually looks like on the table, what you need to know about those elements, and then we'll follow it up with some of my final thoughts. This is the main player board in which you are going to be setting up your heroes, their weapons, their interactions around. It is also going to be keeping track of a lot of your party's information, loot, health, that sort of thing. The heart, the chest, and the armor squares at the bottom are where you're going to be keeping said respective tokens. This is where you're going to be storing them for easy access throughout the game as you lose health on your characters, as you gain loot tokens, or as you gain weapons, treasures, whatever along the way that gives you armor in addition. On the lower left, you see a summary of potions, which play a predominant role in loot that you are getting when you defeat various creatures. And on the lower right, you are seeing the capacity that you have for storing said potions in the first place. And when you do that, all you're doing is placing them on those areas. Now, there are various colors which are representing, obviously, like I said, on the lower left, the various effects of those potions. Very straightforward, usually affecting one stat, a reroll, or just extra attack damage when you're rolling. The two spaces in the middle, your treasure deck, where you're drawing treasure from when a card or an enemy that you defeat says to draw one, and then the vault, where sometimes villains or enemies, monsters, will go after you defeat them. The 5 spaces at the top represent the various location areas that you will be traversing through. So, what does setup look like? Let me show you. Now, changing the camera angle here, you can see a little bit of the heroes set up at the top, and they all have a piece of starting equipment that gives them various powers or allows them to manipulate various stats that are used in terms of the rolling, especially against monsters or in the scenarios. We have set up as well our event deck and our one card for the treasure pile for this opening demo scenario. Now, obviously, this is a prototype, but this is an example of what it's going to look like. Now, I also did something different in this one, as the heroes, which are a little bit farther to see right now, I know, and I'll bring you a close-up here in a second, they are usually set up around the board. And it matters because the mechanism that this game uses, we're going to steal a couple event cards here for a second. For example, as you can see here with the Wyvern, there are several aspects that you need to know. It tells you, obviously, at the bottom, the victory, what you're getting if you lose. But then in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that it has a strength value of 17. And then you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, a skull with as many eyes. So the skull represents how many heroes you're going to be choosing. Now you'll notice that these bad guys really dish out the punishment. All active heroes lose 2 health. discard 2 loot tokens. So what you're going to be seeing is you're going to be seeing these cards get splayed out, and each one of the heroes gets one of these cards assigned to them, and then there are cards left, obviously, in the pile. So the difference with this game is that in order to complete a scenario, in order to complete a location, each hero has to have beaten a monster as the main active hero. Now, what happens is, let's say this wyvern gets assigned to one of these people. Let's give him to said mage, for example. And I'll just put it right here, even though I'm not supposed to. So right now, this mage then, we know that this is a 3-skull hero, right? So let's pretend that this is sort of an oblong oval in this case. Now, he is here, and it is always the hero that is attached to you have to use. But this number of eyes on that skull determines how many of the other heroes are going to be active during that turn as well. So in this case, 3. Now the interesting aspect and the mechanic that they use here is that you go branching outwardly to the left and to the right in a circumferential manner. So I have to go on either side to the martial artist as well as the archer. And what you're doing when you're fighting this monster, for example, like I said, and it says, as we saw here, right, it's strength. We are taking the strength value of all 3 of these characters, adding them up. So that is a total of 5. So that is, right now, without doing anything else, the modifier that I am using to my d20 when I am rolling my d20 to determine whether or not we are successful in combat against the monster. And you already know that we are comparing it to a 17, so essentially I need to roll a 12 or higher. So that's less than a 50% chance on said d20. Now, there are other things that come into effect here, and this is where the mitigation comes in. And this is where I think some of the, you either like this or you don't, because the concept of this game is that you are going to be able to get this game very easily played, very easily set up. The rounds are very, very quick. How much AP and how much overhead depends on the other aspect of this game that I have not talked about much, and that is said equipment cards, right? Because some of these equipment cards allow you to mitigate attack values or heal or do other various effects that are going to be beneficial. And you have also, like I said, potions that are going to do the same thing. So that is where your mitigation of the dice roll comes in. And this is also where you may like this game or not, because it is heavily dependent on the d20. Say what you will. Some of these higher attack values, you can see right there. If I roll right now, I got a 10. Good roll, but that's only 15 total, so I would lose. Everyone would take 2 health damage. They only have like 6 to 8 health right now. So that's not a lot of wiggle room, especially then, because what happens with this is if that was the result of said battle, then this guy, instead of like being discarded, right? Only if we defeat him does he go to the vault. If we don't defeat him, he goes on to the next hero. And the disclaimer is even if you win the next battle over here, this does not count for this hero's win. I still need to then discover what his card is. And his card might be a trap card. It might be another bad guy like it is here. Or it may lead you to one of these entry cards, which is going to lead you to the campaign book of either the main quest or the side quest that is going to be a main feature of this game in the first place. And again, that is going to lead you potentially to another dice roll that you may or may not have a lot of mitigation on, obviously depending on your choice of what you do or what you decide to do in said situation in the first place. Some of the abilities that allow you to mitigate, some of them can be used only, like some of the potions, before you make said die roll. Some, like the archers, allow her to add an attack bonus +1 after the roll if necessary. Some, like the mage's tomb, allows him to discard 2 health, take 2 health damage essentially, and add a +1 to the attack roll after, as opposed to a lot of the other features which make you use the abilities, if you're going to use them for whatever price they are, before the roll, So you can't wait and see if you get it and then just kind of add on top, like with the potions or whatever else. Now, obviously, you can re-roll with one type of potion, and you can add, there's a strength potion that I don't have showing here that's over there, so I could add 2 to my strength potion. And then if I added 1 from here and 1 from here, all of a sudden my mitigation is now +4 additional. And then 4 plus 5 is 9, and then my roll of 10 earlier would have been 19. 19 then takes the wyvern, I put him in the vault, everybody gets rewarded, we get 2 of said loot cubes. So the concept is not, at least at the beginning, very hard to grasp. Now, the choices that are going to come into this, obviously, are when you start having more equipment on characters. We'll talk a little bit more on my thoughts on that in the wrap-up here. Now, like I said, to end this scenario, every single hero needs to have beaten a monster. So you're going to have, now I'm not sure if you're going to have exactly the specific number of heroes and monsters in each scenario, or if there's going to be extras or what, that wasn't clear to me, but that is what has to happen in order to progress. And then you will maybe make your way to the boss cards, which all have unique ways of going around as well, because they make their way around each hero in addition. And if any hero dies, you lose. The whole other phase of the game I didn't talk about is the loot and the trader that you can be using to sell loot, to buy more treasure, to get potions, to sell potions. And so that plays in, but you can only do it at very specific times. It is not a free-for-all whenever you so choose. The loot tokens are then able to be cashed in. The armor tokens are given depending on what armor is out there that will absorb damage. So that is the basic gist of the game. So now that you've seen a little bit more of the how quests Heroes of Sorcado plays, what are my final thoughts? Now, full disclaimer, I mean, this was part of a scenario, part of, a larger portion of a campaign. So it's a little bit tough to be able to say, what does the end product look like compared to this? As you can see, and as you can imagine, a lot of it is dependent on the D20. And how much mitigation you want or need in a game like this is going to probably be the biggest factor on whether or not this game is right for you. This game, true to its style and sense, is going to be very easy to get to the table. I mean, the rules set up, how the interactions work, as you can see, is not something that you're going to have to spend 20, 30, plus minutes. You're not going to have a 20-page rule book of how to play this. It's going to be very streamlined. So in that sense, it definitely accomplishes what it set out to be. Now, the plus minus on this is that because there was only a limited glimpse in this initial prototype scenario, I can't tell you how much more mitigation there is. Now, Dave Killingsworth, the designer, sent me a few examples of what some of the higher level treasures and those sorts of things are going to look like in terms of how much more control and mitigation you're going to have. So there will be more. This is like the opening intro scenario where it is the lowest of the low levels of that. But ultimately, if you are a person that does not want to have to mitigate in certain ways or to certain extents, or if you are somebody who likes the challenge of trying to mitigate in terms of a min-max-ish in a very streamlined manner, this may or may not appeal to you. But that is probably the biggest breaking point, because as I experienced in this prototype scenario, I had a run of very good rolls on the D20, and I had a run of very bad rolls on the D20, which is invariably, when you're including a D20, that's going to happen. Because even if I could mitigate 6, 7, 8 plus, even if I can mitigate it where, my bonus is 10 or 12, right? Invariably, if you're rolling like me, you're going to roll a couple 4s or a couple crits in a row. And how make or break it is that in a game like this? Or how make or break it is that for your enjoyment of a game like this? Like I said, the biggest pro is the one that they're emphasizing. This game is super easy to learn, super easy to play. Now, I will say, though, that The 1 to 6 player count, I don't think I would want to play this with 6 people. I think this, for me personally, I would probably play with 1 or 2 people. It almost felt like a solo game with a little bit extra on top that you could easily manage with 2 people, but might also, you know, especially when you get to those higher levels that I was talking about, when each character of the 6 of them has, you know, 3 or even 4 combinations of equipments. It reminds me of my experience trying to do solo when I played the Stygian Society. It was great, but there was so much to remember, so much mitigation going on with each individual character that it was too much in the sum of the whole. So that's where I'd say maybe 2, maybe even 3. I don't think I would want to play this with many more, because then I would probably feel like my action was not as robust as I would like. But again, if you have more of the general-ish, party-ish crowd, and you're looking to play something more like Gloomhaven, but it's clearly not going to work, this would be a nice filler. But the question is, do you have a group that meets those criteria? The other concern that I would have is, because there are more limited amounts of stats, because there are a limited amount of several of those, is how much different some of the enemies are going to be, how much different are some of the items going to be. And I think that's a question, hopefully, that, like I said, when he showed me a few of the higher level ones, and hopefully there will be more examples on the Kickstarter page, a full set of the rules of going through everything, like what happens between scenarios and what else there is. It can give you a better glimpse into that, because, like, also with the monsters, like, how different are the monsters going to be? Okay, well, this monster causes me to lose 2 life every time. This monster causes me to lose 2 loot every time. How many variations of that can you have and keep it creative? That is going to be another big make it or break it, because sometimes, I mean, I'm personally not that creative. So for me, I wouldn't be able to come up with this. But as we've seen in other similar games, I mean, just think of like games like Aeon's End, right? Like, I don't think that you could do many more mechanisms, but they always invariably find a new way to make a twist on an old thing. What is that going to look like in here? And hopefully the full page gives you much more detail and much more nuance and much more explanation of what that's going to look like, more so than I was able to see with this limited early prototype. And the question is, because the price point is going to be lower on this game than it is going to be, say, for said miniatures games or other games that, you know, frankly speaking, I say this all the time in some of the other videos, like, can you have too many campaign games? No, you can't. Yes, you can. This is a campaign game that it's going to be a lot easier to get to the table. And ultimately, how easy it is for you to get to the table is probably going to be the biggest decision point, because the price point seems about right for the amount of content that they're offering. But again, how challenging, how much mitigation, how much randomness do you like in a game like this? That's what you need to be aware of, and that's what you need to take into account. If that sounds good to you, check this out, back it, take a look. As always, thanks for watching. Stay classy. I'll see you around.